we have the arid cycle, we have the periglacial cycle, we talked about savanna cycle and also the karst cycle. And I had put alag se based on the structural aspects. I also put the cycle of erosion for dome structures. Now, a couple of common things you must remember in all these answers. The concept of cycle, you have to mention youth, mature, senile, but there is one initial phase in almost all of them. So in all these cycles, there is an initial stage. Don't forget this one. And then the final senile is not a problem. It's a flat surface. The sequence of development, youth and mature is what you have to know a bit more detail. In all these, the youthful stages, we have a river which is starting to erode. And in youthful stages, the relative relief is starting to develop. And mature stage, we have the proper landform formation. And each of them will have different set of landforms. In savanna cycle, there is more of discussion about the landforms. The stage is not given as well. I think you could have looked up JC, Pugh, Pug's model. So it's more of a description how there is some undulating landscape here. And in the undulating landscape, some landforms get exposed. There is some kind of back wasting here. The relief will sharpen. And finally, we have depositional features here. And they also talked about how the upper layers gets removed and we probably have a flat H-plane. H-plane idea was given by M.F. Thomas, whereas Pugh talks about pediplanes and the lateral retreat. So just giving a structure of the answer. So in the answer, start the answer by discussing cycle of erosion. The Davis model, fluvial cycle of erosion, talks about climatic accidents, ignores the role of structure, and thereafter he expands the concept. And others also take up finally. So start with the cycle discussion. What is it? Have a reference to initial landscape. This shouldn't be a problem. And conclusion. Conclusion may end the answer with that the cycle concept is no longer acceptable. But it's convenient to understand that when the river is in the mountains, there are deep valleys. When the river is in the flatter landscape, it can start meandering. When the river is cutting deeply more, I can have gorges. When the river starts widening, I have got wider rivers. So we still use the idea called youth, mature, senile, more for convenience of description. Not to say that these are closed systems, progression of changes. So finish the answer in that type of a conclusion. Now there are two ideas here. The two ideas tell us that in savanna, the cycle of erosion is typical back wasting, typical lateral erosion, where a pediment is formed. So I have a mountain here. There is erosion in the dry conditions. There is back wasting, parallel retreat here. Slowly, gradually, the mountain is moving back. The slopes are moving back. And what I get is an erosional pediment. So imagine there's a mountain. This is a mountain. Starts eroding, moving backwards. And slowly, gradually, this gets exposed. And this is the pediment. So this is the idea of L-seeking. L-seeking's idea. That this surface is essentially an exposed pediplane. Exposed pediplane. Pugh says this is not the process. It is not, maybe this operates more in the case of arid cycle. So we are differentiating an arid cycle from the cycle of savanna. Because savanna mein, unlike arid cycle, savanna has enough of moisture. Savanna has enough of moisture. And because of moisture, there is lot of chemical weathering, where the upper layer starts weathering. And underneath this is a surface called as basal level of weathering, is the new bedrock underneath this. Okay. So this is the basal weathering layer. And then what happens is, because of some agency of erosion, this layer gets removed. And Pugh says that this removal happens with upliftment. Okay, so there is probably some surface here. Okay, he says the landform gets uplifted because of difference of height. Some river moves down the slope and these sediments get removed, and what we are left with is something like an erosional surface. Okay? Unlike L.C. King. For L.C. King, the process is what? Lateral erosion and back wasting and parallel retreat. Typically almost something like what was being said about the arid cycle. But Pugh says no, because you cannot ignore the process of chemical weathering. This is a dry area, but unlike arid region, it does have moisture, lots of moisture here. And high temperatures में chemical weathering शुरू हो जाएगा. So the above layer gets weathered and the landform gets uplifted for whatever reason. And then the river moving down will erode the sediments and we have a surface exposed, and this is that kind of, and this upliftment can happen in 2-3 cycles. And over time, probably I'm left with a flatter surface. So the removal is a consequence of a river, but with chemical erosion and upliftment also. M.F. Thomas says it is not removal by rivers, it's removal by what's called as rain wash. So when we have got heavy rains, the rain starts sweeping the surface, not like a stream, but like a sheet of water. So the removal of this and what we create is an H-plane. In case of Pugh's model, we don't talk about pediment formations. L.C. King talks about pediments. Pugh's model does not talk about pediments. He just says some surface gets removed and a flatter surface is now being exposed. So, ये तीन term है. There is a pediplane, there is some flat surface, and there is an H-plane. H-plane idea is M.F. Thomas, pediplane idea is L.C. King, and there's no specific name, okay, in case of the Pugh's model. So we summarize Pugh's model, 4 points. There is chemical erosion, there is upliftment happening, the removal is a consequence of some stream or a river, and the final surface has no name as such, and it is a flatter surface, okay, which is like a senile topography. Is it okay, all of you? Did you understand how in domal erosion we have swestas and sills and dikes? In case you missed that part. So what's a dome structure? It's essentially a kind of, I said, okay, an elevated, it's a kind of an elevated, okay, feature. It's like a swell. It's up warping. Okay, so the land has swelled like this. Okay, ऐसे फूल गया है, swelling. The above layers probably have some sediments. There are some sediments here. And in most cases, the upwarping is because of some volcanism underneath, but not strong enough to erupt as a volcano. So some magma comes out and there is some crystalline core which forms here. This is a hard, like a batholith. And with this, we can also, as the layers as we can have some intrusions. We can have a sill, we can have a dike. This is a sill here. We can have a dike here. And because it remains for a long time, we can safely assume the above layer hai, it's probably a layer of a hard rock. ये वाला. अगर soft होगा पूरा erode हो जाएगा साथ ना. So there is probably some layer on the top which is relatively harder that protects the entire feature. And underneath this, there are layers of softer rocks. There are layers of softer rocks. So when the erosion process starts, you start with some erosion. The rivers are running down, typically radial drainage, centrifugal drainage. Okay, the above part gets eroded because of headward erosion, and this part forms a depression where some of these rocks can get exposed. Maybe a sill gets exposed, a dike gets exposed, some hyperbasal landform gets exposed. These exposed landforms are those hogbacks. Hogback will be an exposed dike, more steeper, more symmetrical, hogbacks. We can have suestas. Suesta, okay, is a gentle sloping on one side, and then, so if this is a sill, gentle sloping one side and then a sharper slope here. So when the dome gets eroded and exposed from between, we have these kind of landforms getting exposed. Suestas and hogbacks and some of the remnants of the hyperbasal landforms. Or dhire dhire, the entire dome will get exposed. And then of course eventually flatten. So this could have been a question. How do those hyperbasal landforms get exposed in the dome? Okay, erosion. Have you seen that page of yours in Savindra Singh? Chapter number 10, page number 183. There is some discussion about how that dome feature is formed.